Hello, good morning, Saturday. No driving today. As you can see, not in my car for once. Um, just wanted to, well, start with what I said I would start with today. And over the next few days, or the next few Saturdays rather, I'm going to take some time and I'm going to go through my current campaign, tell you all kind of what's going on in it, introduce you to the characters that are in it, and kind of also talk through a bit about what I thought would happen in the game versus what actually happened in the game. I will include a link to the campaign diary that I write each week. Um, so if you want to read up on that, you can. You can see kind of where I've got my notes about what's happened. So starting out, just to kind of um, put a frame around it, this is a Monday night campaign run on Roll20. Um, so if you look back to my video about tabletop versus desktop, I run most of my games now on Roll20. Um, it's just the way the world is now that time is at a premium and it's hard to get people together. This game has now been running for quite a while. We're up to nearly 30 sessions. So if you figure once a week, we've been going for over half a year. In game time, about a year's time has passed. That probably seems like a lot for a lot of campaigns, but as I'll comment on later as well, this is a Spelljammer campaign. Now, that does mean that you have a lot of travel time. And short of just throwing random things at players um, in order to lengthen the time of a journey, there are times when we will just say, you need to go from point A to point B. 3 weeks pass on the ship. So, that's very often the case. That's why time has passed as it has. So, starting out, we had a session 0. Now, this is something that a lot of DMs don't use, a lot of DMs don't kind of think about, but I'm always positive that a session 0 makes a better game. What I mean by a session 0 is talking to the players individually and as a group before the campaign starts. Explain what type of campaign you're looking to run, explain something about the setting, have a chance for the players to have a little bit of setup, interaction, go from there. Now, the main things that came out of the session 0 was one of my players in character creation asked, instead of a magic item which I had offered to let them have, could he swap that out for information about a more powerful magic item. I allowed that, so I have included the Legend of the Sword and the Stars. Sorry about that. So yeah, the Legend of the Sword and the Stars, basically a very powerful artifact level magic item that he had a bit of information on. He knew of someone on the Rock of Brawl who would possibly be able to tell him more about it. Um, it gave him a bit of a story hook into that, to know that if he got to this tavern master, it would very likely get him closer to the sword. The other thing that I had, which was more of a general plot point for most of the characters, and this is actually playing off of a previous game that we had just wrapped up, was that basically in the spheres as we began, if you're not familiar with Spelljammer, think of each sphere as a solar system. So you've got 3, 5, maybe 8, 9 planets, a sun, and they're encased in what they call a sphere. And certain ships are able to travel between the spheres, but a lot of races stay within their own sphere. And basically, what they had discovered was that through some bizarre instance, which they have no idea what caused it, all of the Illithid across the spheres vanished. Gone. Now, a couple of the players out of character do know that is the result of a wish cast in the last game to get rid of them. But they, as characters, don't know that. But the Illithid are gone. That means that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of worlds that used to be Illithid worlds, where all of a sudden there's a bunch of slaves sat around, no food, no provisions, no idea what they're doing, because they're slaves. What do they know about fending for themselves? It's never been what they've learned how to do, and some of them have been slaves for generations. They find out about a specific world in one case in point where the slaves have managed to get into the vault of the Illithid, and they have all of the Illithid's money, but they don't have basic things like clothing or food. So the ship decides to load up with food, head that way, help out, and make a bit of money doing it. That was kind of where we were with our Session 0. Now, moving on then to Session 1. We did a bit of a recap for anyone who had not been there for all of the Session 0 stuff. I let the characters introduce themselves to each other. I also introduced them to their NPC crew. Obviously, they started the game with a ship, so the ship had a crew. We also discussed what roles the player characters would play on the ship. Excuse me. And from there, that basically took up all of the first session, just getting introductions out of the way. Moving on, then we actually started the game. And I had a character, or rather I had a player, who I managed to talk around into allowing one of my experiments as a DM. Basically, he was going to play a character. He had no idea what this character was. No name, no class, no race. When we started the sessions, he didn't even have a character sheet. I had a character sheet. And in the second session, which was really the first session of play, the crew of the ship is flying through space. And they come upon a small metallic coffin, basically. They brought it on the ship. They opened it up. In it, they found a man made out of crystal. Or rather, a man with crystal growing out of him, almost covering him like a shell or an armor. When they managed to awaken him, realizing that he was alive in that thing, he had no memory of who he was, no memory of what he was. Now, this has been very interesting for me as a DM, because for the first 5, 6, 7 sessions, maybe even a bit longer, the character had no idea what he could and could not do. So he was looking at something and saying, okay, I pick up a sword. Do I feel like I know how to use this? Or a weapon, a gun, a crossbow. Do I know how this works? Or someone says something to him and he has to think about it and say, okay, DM, do I remember anything about anything like that? And he was constantly trying to feel out what he knew and what he didn't. Now, this was something that I thought would be a very interesting ripple to put into the game. A character who has no idea who he is. However, it ended up backfiring on me a bit because we had the ship going in one direction, off to do this humanitarian food run, this profit-making exercise. And when they ran into this pod, I expected that after they had done that food run, they would then go back and investigate and try to figure out more about what was going on. That didn't happen. What instead happened was most of the ship continued heading on like they had been, and one character decided he was going to go off on his own to investigate. Now, he is playing an Arcane. Talked about them previously. They are merchants, explorers. Arcane are the most successful merchants in the spheres. If you want anything, you go to the Arcane for it. Especially spelljamming technology. It's something that almost no one but them has. They also have a way of moving through the spheres that other people don't possess. And they keep very secret what that is. Well, this character decided that while the ship was traveling to Red Eye, which is where they were dropping off the food, he was instead going to teleport himself the other direction to the Rock of Brawl, which is a pirate port, a merchant city, a hub of spelljamming. Now, the reason that he went to the Rock of Brawl, A, is because there's a lot of knowledge to be had there, and B, is because there was information on the metal coffin which pointed to the prince's library in Brawl. So the character decided to go pay a visit to the library. Now, what I think both the character and the player did not realize until he got there was that not just anyone can walk into the prince's library. Access is controlled. You have to have permission to enter. So, being an Arcane, he did the only thing that made sense to him. He tried to bribe the guards. Now, he tried to bribe them with a very large amount of money as well. And they took the money, still didn't get him into the library. And so he departed to think of something else to do. This compounded the issue because I had already established that although the Arcane who was a member of our crew, Susha, is not a powerful Arcane, he has an uncle who is a very powerful Arcane. And as a very powerful Arcane, he had a base of operations in Brawl. And it reached his attention that a young Arcane was drawing a lot of attention to himself in a very prominent place, waving a lot of money around. When he found out that it was his nephew, he was not at all pleased with this. And so he actually sent some of his people to apprehend his nephew and bring him in so that they could discuss things. Now, that was a natural progression at the time based on events that happened. The problem is that I had already established the uncle's character, Shansara, and I had not planned on bringing him into the game until much later, because he is a very powerful individual, and I wanted to have the crew have a bit of time to get their feet before they met him. And this player going off on his own completely altered that. And I thought, okay, I can work with this. His uncle will give him a telling off, and I can kind of drop him back into the background again. No, it was just not to be. Because the next thing that the player does is he tells his uncle about this experiment they've found. This crystal man. And of course his uncle, being knowledgeable, being influential, knows what they've found. And he wants it. Again, this is a plot point that should have happened 4 or 5 levels later. At the least. When Shanshara and the experiment finally met. But instead, he found out about it. Basically in the first session. That was where we ended that week. The next week, we came back. I'd had some time to think about it. And unfortunately, the only thing I could come up with that Shanshara would do, knowing now that one of these things had been found, was go there. So he takes his nephew, and they get into his ship, which is called an Ivory Tower, and they head towards Red Eye, traveling much faster than the player character's ship. We then cut back to the rest of the group as they're traveling. The group encounters a flame garden in space, basically an asteroid with a wreath of flame surrounding it, and on that asteroid a crystal rose with a plaque that says "Never Forgotten" in Elven. They investigated, they looked into it, they debated taking the item, and then finally decided against it. Decided to leave it there. One of the best choices as a group they could have made. The item was actually a gravestone. It was also cursed. Excuse me again. And further, it was a gravestone tied to a specific person who the crew was, unbeknownst to them, about to meet. And who, if they had had that when they met that person, it would have ended very badly. On their travels then past the Flame Garden, the group encounters an elven armada. Our armada is a very large elven spelljammer. The ship is called the Dawn Song, and the captain is Andari's Stillbreeze. Now, the Andaris and the Dawn Song have just left Red Eye, and they're actually heading towards Brawl for more supplies. Now, because the elves kind of see themselves as a humanitarian organization in Spelljammer, they've been making trips back and forth since they heard about Red Eye's issues trying to feed the people. And I think for there, we've gone long enough. I'm going to leave it with that encounter, and we'll pick up there next week. Have a great day, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.